the central collecting point in Jerusalem. Now, this was already a city wall.
You who have read Sitchin's Earth Chronicles, or even one or two books in the series, are already familiar with the term Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. Zecharia Sitchin, 1920–2010, was a Russian linguist and author, later a New York resident, who took on as his life mission to translate the old Sumerian clay tablets. I am not going to go into much details here about how Sitchin came to his conclusions, as this can be studied elsewhere, but in general, he found that about 450,000 years ago an advanced race of creator gods came to Earth from their home planet, Nibiru, or Same. In their own language pronounced Shami. To cut or break, creation, red ochre plus watery father plus office, ideal norm, in the same language, an imager, having nearly identical meanings in Sumerian as well. According to Sitchin's translations, they didn't originally come here as settlers, but to dig gold and minerals, something that Earth wasn't still as rich on. With time, this space-bound warrior race decided to use the existing primates as slaves in their minds and started an additional genetic manipulation of the early humans. The Sumerians, who left accounts of their myth inscribed on cuneiform tablets some 5,000 years ago, tell a spectacular story of these gods who came down and ruled over them. Not only do these tablets tell their present-time story, but they also told the story of their own creation and how the gods arrived on Earth and manipulated the DNA of early humans. Apparently, these stories were taught to the Sumerian people by this warrior race and go back about 450,000 years in time. Even today, these stories are passed down to a few initiates into the mystery schools and secret societies around the world. As we shall see, this species is equivalent to the biblical fallen angels and Nephilim. Zecharia Sitchin has been accused of many things, from being a complete fraud who's making it all up, or being a government disinformation agent, a shape-shifting reptilian. Part of the establishment because he went to a famous university, and more. But at the end of the day, his translations and conclusions are surviving the winds of time. Of course, he was human, and was not always right, but he did a good job in helping us understand our past. And not only can we see the effects today from what the Sumerians wrote on their clay tablets and thus see that this is not a fable, but there are, like I've mentioned earlier, people who have actually met with the Sami from their home planet Same, and these beings have told them that most of Sitchin's work is right on. If I ever had any doubts about its authenticity, I do no more. Sitchin did the best he could with what he had at his convenience. I'm convinced about it. However, just because he did an outstanding job translating the tablets doesn't mean that the tablets were totally accurate. I have reasons to believe that on some accounts, the scribes, who wrote down what's on the cuneiform tablets, were not always told the truth by those who dictated them, the Anunnaki. Scholars and others may object and say that these tablets were not written by one person, and not everything was dictated, so that doesn't hold water, but it does. Most probably, the present time which the Sumerians were depicting in clay was most certainly correct from their point of view, but the past history of Earth, seen from their present, was to some extent altered to more fit into certain agendas planned by a faction, and sometimes most of the Anunnaki themselves. We know for a fact that Marduk Ra changed the Earth history at least once, and Ninja Siddha, also known as Thoth, probably did, too, and there were more. Still, they didn't bother keeping their own struggle with each other off the record, clearly showing the character of many of these beings. On the other hand, they probably had little choice, because the humans knew how they were. Despite this fact, Sitchin's version is a must-read if we want to know our own true history and our origins. This alien species had reasons to edit out and change a few things, because they also knew that those from the home planet would return to Earth one day, and they had to prepare humanity for this, so that their arrival would be as smooth as possible. In this first level of learning, I will concentrate on the Anunnaki, although there were other alien species here during the time the Anunnaki had their peak time on Earth. The Sumerian scriptures make it sound like they were the only gods here, which was not the case. We will bring up other races too in future papers, and in the second level of learning, I will tell the deeper story about the Anunnaki as it were, and as it is, according to my own research. However, this subject is so vast that it's more than enough, as a starter, to bring Sitchin's material into new light. And another reason why I am separating out this species from many of the others is that they are the ones who have had the most influence on humankind of all ET races from 300,000 years ago up to present time. The curious thing is that although most people think that this was all in the past, in fact, the Anunnaki never left. Some of them stayed, and there was only a short period of time during the second half of the first millennium AD when they all left. And this world was left with humans only for the first time in perhaps 250,000 years. One misconception that I want to point out already now is that some people think that at least we owe the Anunnaki for manipulating our DNA. Without their intervention, we would still be apes running around on the savannas and in the bushes. This is exactly what the Anunnaki want us to believe, and that's one of their best cards. My viewpoint, backed up by research, shows another picture. We shall go into that after the story about the Anunnaki on Earth is told Sitchin's version, mind you. But don't think for a second that it's not worth reviewing Sitchin's translations. They're gems, in my opinion. If you are not totally familiar with them and don't know who is who in the saga, please review my papers in regards to the Anunnaki. And if you're new to them, here is the story in condensed form. Before we start discussing the huge influence of the Anunnaki on Earth and human history, I want to pay my tribute, not only to Sitchin and those who came after, but also to the anthropologist, Dr. Sasha Lesson, whom I've spent a lot of time putting Sitchin's pieces together in a fluent, coherent format, which makes it read like one compressed novel. Through his Enki Speaks essays on the site thelivingmoon.com/42stargate. This has been very helpful in my own studies to grasp the wealth of Sitchin's research. And I have used Lesson's essays as a resource quite a bit in my own Anunnaki papers to make Sitchin's work more available to the public. Now, before we introduce Sitchin's work further, let's start by going back in time some 4.2 to 4.5 billion years to see how the Anunnaki themselves were seeded and created.